if the Mashiach, if the Klal Yisrael is Zoche the Mashiach Be'ita by the case, it means that they're not Zoche because of their own Maisim. It means they're Zoche because of the Maisim, because of the Rachmanas of the Bonisham. In that case, the Mashiach is the Kukuloi. The Mashiach is an Oni Voicha V'Lachamor. That is the difference between the two. There was once a very interesting novel written by a famous English author, I believe an English author, Oscar Wilde. And the name of the book was The Picture of Dorian Gray. I don't know if ever saw the book and so on and so on, but it's a very interesting book. What the book describes is a very interesting concept. It's a story about a certain person, a certain man, who, when he's a very young person, goes to have a portrait painted. And the name of the man is Dorian Gray. And they paint the portrait, and he takes the portrait home and puts it upstairs in the attic. And a strange thing happens. As he goes through life, he begins to have matzliach, but he begins to become a big Rasha. And he does very, very bad deeds. And a very funny thing happens, that as he gets older, and he does more and more Ma'asim Rishoyim, his face never ages. He always remains the same. He always looks like he's 20 years old. You see. However, when you look at the picture is getting older. And the picture actually reflects the age and the ashkata that this person has. You see. That's the name of the story, The Picture of Dorian Gray. In a similar way, the Mashiach is like the picture of Klal Yisrael, in a certain sense. That the Aniyas and the Dalas of Klal Yisrael is really not felt that much by Klal Yisrael. Even though it's occurring to them, they don't truly experience it in that way. It's the Mashiach who's their reflection and who is serving that Aniyas, who really feels what's going on. In that sense, he is the parallel to Klal Yisrael itself. Thus we find a very important yesod, that the appearance of the Mashiach, or the way that he will look, the true of the Mashiach, depends on the appearance of Klal Yisrael. If Klal Yisrael is zoicha to the Yemot Mashiach because of Achishena, because of the fact that they're tzaddikim, and therefore the Mashiach who then appears is in the form of a tzaddik. However, if Klal Yisrael is zoicha to the Mashiach because of Be'ita, because it's the case, not because it's tzaddikim, because it's kula chayovim, then the Mashiach does not appear in the form of a tzaddik, but the Mashiach himself, in many ways, looks or borders on almost having certain of the inyanim of a sick person, and even in some cases of looking like a Rasha. That's a staggering concept, yes. But we're going to that. It depends on the two of Klal Yisrael. If Klal Yisrael is in a state of spiritual health, that's called Klal Yisrael b'tikunoi, in a state of tikkun. In that case, the Mashiach is in his state of tikkun. The Mashiach is b'tikunoi. If Klal Yisrael is in a state of chuban, because they're showing them all, whatever the story is, then it's said to be Klal Yisrael is b'kilkulam, and the Mashiach is b'kilkuloi. The Mashiach is in a state of kilkul. Now, what does it mean that the Mashiach is in a state of kilkul? The Mashiach in a state of tikkun is the way the Mashiach should look. Right? How does the Mashiach look? The Mashiach looks like Moshe Rabbeinu. It says in the Pasuk, the Chazal Darshanat, V'nosav v'gova v'yom v'nosav v'gova me'od. So Chazal learn out that the Mashiach is bigger than Avraham Avinu, the Mashiach is bigger than Moshe Rabbeinu, the Mashiach is bigger than the Malach HaShores. And the Ramchal says in the Kinnis Hashem that his face, just to look at his face, is noiros. His tsua, his toya, is noiros. It's like awesome just to look at him, or just to perceive him, and so on. That's what the Mashiach looks like, the tikkunai, you see. With the immense kedusha that the Mashiach has. What's the immense kedusha? The Chazal say also, and the Ramchal say this, that fundamentally every Gadol Hador, every manig in Klal Yisrael, from the beginning of time and so on, has a nitzitz, or a certain koyach, not nitzitz, but a certain koyach hashpor of the Shechina. You see, every Gadol has a certain koyach that the Shechina gives them to be a manig or Gadol. But the Mashiach, the Mashiachin, the Tvei Mashiach, the Mashiach ben David and the Mashiach ben Yosef, and Moshe Rabbeinu in the Asad Lavoi,
do not have a hashpah of the Shechina, but the Shechina actually is shura on them, like it was on the Beis HaMikdash. That's an incredible thing, that the Shechina is shura or dwells on the person like it did on the Beis HaMikdash, in the Kodesh Kedoshim. So could you imagine what it is to meet a person where the Shechina dwells on him? The Hashros HaShechina on the person himself? It's staggering. That's what the Mashiach looks like, the Tikkunoi, which is to be expected. But if the Mashiach is B'Kulkuloi because of Klal Yisrael, he not only doesn't have a Shechina to be a Shayra on him, but he looks like, first of all, a very sick person. What the Torah says, and we'll read it, he's in a state of hashchasa, or sickness, or deterioration, advanced deterioration, and he even appears to be a Rasha in certain instances. Because the Pasuk says, Vayitain Rishoyim is Kivoy. That people buried him among the Rishoyim, because they were madama him to a Rasha. Now you may say, what do you mean, how could they treat their own Mashiach as a Rasha? That's not a Pikasha. Because when Moshe Rabbeinu came, how many times did Klal Yisrael threaten to stone Moshe Rabbeinu? You see. But this is the point, that the Mashiach in a state of Kilkul is a terrible, terrible Zach. And he's in a state of Kilkul because of Klal Yisrael. Why is he in a state of Kilkul? Why? It's like we've said. Because the Kilkul of the Mashiach, the Hashchos of the Mashiach, the suffering of the Mashiach. When the Mashiach is born and he lives as a human being, and he's in the state of Hashchosa, and a state of Kilkul, he is in intense suffering all his life. That suffering is the suffering which is mechape on Klal Yisrael and allows Klal Yisrael to survive in the Golus. In the Ekvis the Mashiach. Well, not to the fact that the Mashiach was in a state of Kilkul, Klal Yisrael could not survive in the Golus. The Midas Hadin would wipe them out. You see. Now what's very important to understand is that when the Mashiach suffers for Klal Yisrael, it doesn't mean that Klal Yisrael has the ability to acquit itself of all its Averis. That's not true. Every Yid that does an Avera will get it back in some way. But the problem is that in Olam Hazeh, in order for Olam Hazeh to survive, this world which is the Mokum of Ishtadlus, in order for it to survive, you see, the Midas Hadin has to be quiescent to some degree. So what the Banishim does is, he allows the Mishpat to be Toveya every person, La'asad Lava, in the Yom HaDin. In the Yom HaDin before Elam Haba, everyone goes to Din Torah, and everyone is needed whether or not he goes to Elam Haba, and exactly to what extent he has Elam Haba. But in order to allow the Jews to survive, even with the Chatoim, the Banishim has to, in some way, to quiet the Midas Hadin. So he does that by putting tremendous Yisur and the Soib Lechaloyim on certain Tzadikim, and the highest of them all on the Mashiach. You see. And when the Mashiach is served with tremendous Yisurin, so the Satan, who is the Mekatrik, is quiet. For reasons we're going to later on. That's the mechanism of Anukas HaYichud. When Tzadikim have klep, when there's a Tzadik V'Raloi, and they have Yisurin, then the Satan is not Mekatrik on Klal Yisrael. And if it's not Mekatrik on Klal Yisrael, there's no din that attempts to Ma'abed the Bria, to destroy the world, you see. The Satan is quiet. The Kippur is quiet. You see, so the world can continue going on and allow the Matav of Ishtadlus to continue. You see, so therefore the Mashiach only delays the din. He only delays it by his suffering. He allows the world to have a kiyum and he delays the mishpat until Yom HaDin. But in Yom HaDin there's full mishpat. You cannot get into Olam Haba with full mishpat. You see, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu Movater. The Banishim does not, what do you call it, absolve Klal Yisrael because of its sins. He's Taveya, the din is Taveya. But he waits. He waits so that the world can still have a kiyum. That's the suffering of the Mashiach. Where do you see the suffering of Mashiach? In Tillim. It says there in Tillim, Le'eved nimka Yosef, u'bazul ba'o b'nafshay. It says about Yosef, Le'eved nimka Yosef. Over there it's really referring to the Mashiach ben Yosef, who bears the main brunt of Yisurin, because he's the one who has to matar the Bria from the Zoyama. Le'eved nimka Yosef. Yosef is sold to a slave. He's an Eved. What does it mean Eved? It means he's totally under the domination of the Klippas. He can't move. U'balzer born b'nashai, and an iron yoke enters into his nefesh. That's the Yisurin of the Mashiach. Specifically Mashiach ben Yosef. that a balzel, an iron yoke, enters in and causes it immense suffering. That has to do with the original contract that the Banishim made with the Mashiach, Ben Yosef, especially with the Mashiach Ben Yosef, because he's the one who bears the brunt of the tar of the Bria. That the Mashiach Ben Yosef bears it, and the Banishim made a contract that he would be served the Yisurim so that the world will have a kiyum until Yom Adin. You see, and that's what the Tehillim says. That's where we see the concept of the Mashiach in a suffering way. Now it says Ba'al Bo B'Nafshay. That pasuk begins to tell us what the embassy Yisurim of the Mashiach is. That the Yisurim of the Mashiach is not something which is external, but it's a suffering of the nefesh itself, of his very neshama, of his internal being is suffering. And that's what we're going to go on to. But I'd like to give an understanding of one more statement. Have you ever noticed, whenever you look at the Psukim, it says in the Psukim, Mashiach Tzidkenu, right? Mashiach, the righteous one. In fact, in the message when it says about Ephraim, the Mashiach Ben Yosef, it says Ephraim Mashiach Tzidki. When the Banishim said to the Sultan, what is the name of the Mashiach? So the Banishim says, his name is Ephraim Mashiach Tzidki, the righteous Mashiach. So the instant question, what do you mean Ephraim Mashiach Tzidki? The fact that he's a Mashiach, don't I already know that he's a tzaddik? You call him a Mashiach, what do you have to tell me he's a tzaddik? You ever seen that Lashon used by anyone? Moshe Tzidki, Yaakov Tzidki, you don't find that the Banishim calls, he calls them Abdi, this and that, but they're thinking of a tzaddik. Of Satan, obviously the Mashiach is a tzaddik. Because this is a simon. It's a simon of the Yisun of the Mashiach. That when you take a look at the Mashiach in the Kukuloi, he does not look like a tzaddik. Adrabah, he seems to almost appear as a Rasha, but definitely appears with a hashchos, as a mushchos, really. So he says, what shaykh does this have? So the Banishim says, and this is the panimis of the statement, when the Banishim says Mashiach Tzidki, that the Mashiach is a tzaddik, the Banishim saying is that the Mashiach is a tzaddik in all his conditions. Whether that condition be one of tikkun, and therefore he's obviously a tzaddik, or that condition be one of kilkul. Even in a state of kilkul, the Mashiach is a tzaddik. And the reason why he has to suffer that way is because of the fact that he's a tzaddik. Don't think for 1 minute, because you can't recognize him, that he's not a tzaddik, or he doesn't appear as such. That the Mashiach is a tzaddik from the beginning to the end. That's what it means. Ephraim Mashiach Tzidki. Mashiach is a tzaddik. It means he's a tzaddik no matter what he looks like. And it is because of the fact that he's such a tzaddik, that's why he sometimes doesn't look like a tzaddik. To be civil to Chatoim of Klal Yisrael. Because of this, fundamentally, if the Mashiach comes be'ita, or in the case, it means the Mashiach, in the ikvus the Mashiach, when he's born. The Yemos Mashiach starts at a certain time. The generation before the Yemos Mashiach is called the ikvus the Mashiach. And Chazal say that if the ikvus the Mashiach arrives in such a way, where it's be'ita, where it has to come up to the case, it will have a terrible hashchasa. Klal Yisrael will be in a very, very low madrega, chutzpah yizger, and so on and so forth. That means that the Mashiach, who is born in the Ikvus Mashiach, he's born, right before. If this is the Ikvus Mashiach, that means the Mashiach is born. The Mashiach now lives somewhere. The Mashiach Ben Yosef now lives somewhere in the world. If this is the Ikvus Mashiach. And it means that in this world, he exists in this particular state in a hashchosa, in a kilkul, so that he's not recognizable. So therefore, from this, we see clearly that a person who's known to be a very big tzaddik, or very big Yir Shemayim, or very big Kodesh, and so on, or very big Manik, cannot be the Mashiach. You see, do you understand? He cannot be the Mashiach. Because that's the thing, that's the Nevi'us. Now I'm going to read the Psukim in a minute. That the Mashiach in the time of the case of the Ita is a Mushchas, and he's in a state of kilkul. He does not have the appearance of a tzaddik, even though he is a tzaddik. He does not have the appearance of a manig, of a Yir Shemayim, or anything. He is the last person that people would think is a Mashiach. If you went into a room with all people, the last person that they would think is a Mashiach would be this guy. You see, that's how we know that any public figures which exist today, or have any chashivas whatsoever, cannot be the Mashiach. When I say that Mashiach is the Kulkuloi, what am I talking about? Fundamentally, I'm talking about the Yechidah, which is the Neshama of the Kes of the Mashiach. That's called the Melech HaMashiach. That is in the Klippas with the Shechina. It's in the Golas, in the Klippa with the Shechina. Just like the Shechina is in Golas, that Neshama is also, and that's the highest Neshama. From that Neshama is crowned the two people who have the Koyach to become the Mashiachim. From that neshama called the Yechida, which is the highest neshama, will come the Or HaGonas, which will light up the whole world with Chachma, you see. Where is that neshama? That neshama is in the Klippas, and so on. Now, normally speaking, until that neshama comes down, every Mashiach who lives, you see, or potential Mashiach rather, who lives, whether Mashiach ben David, Mashiach ben Yosef, if he is not a real Mashiach, then his connection to that Yechida is very slight. So therefore the Hashchasa which appears on him will also be very slight. The greater the Hashchasa of Klal Yisrael, the deeper the Klippa, the deeper the Yechida goes into the Klippa. Let's understand exactly the mechanism. When Klal Yisrael is b'kilkulam, when they're chayovim, then what happens is Yechida, which is their Yeshua, which is the Melech HaMashiach, which represents the end of the Golus and so on, is in the Klippas. The deeper the Kilkul of Klal Yisrael, the deeper the Yechida goes into the Klippa. You see, the deeper the Shechina goes into the Klippa. Therefore, the Mashiach at that point in time, who is connected to Yechida, has a greater Hashchasa. Now, until the time that the actual Mashiach appears, in other words, if you only have a potential Mashiach, that potential Mashiach is connected to the Yechida, but only slightly. You see, and since he's connected to the Yechida slightly, he has to be the Yisuin of the Yechida. You see. However, in the end of time, in the Ikta Mashiach, when the Mashiach who's born, who will be the Mashiach, who is the actual person that will ultimately have the Yechida, then he has a very powerful connection to that Yechida. Even when Yechida is still in the Klippas and he doesn't have it. The Mashiach ben Yosef in the Ikta Mashiach is not the Mashiach yet. He's only a Shirish, he's a potential. But since he is the one that will finally be the one, his connection to the Yechida will be very, very powerful. Hence his Hashchasa will be greater than any Shirish of any Mashiach that ever lived before him, do we see. And the only time that Hashchasa will be taken away from that Mashiach, who will become the real Mashiach or the actual Mashiach, is when the Yechida lifts up from the Klippa, and the Shechina lifts up from the Klippa. And then the Yechida will descend onto the Mashiach, and then all the Hashchasa will leave. Not only that Hashchasa will leave, but a tremendous Kedusha will descend as well. And we'll get into that later, into that part. Where do I know this from? Why do I say these things? Where do we see that the Mashiach is a mushchas and is in a state of kilkul to such a degree that you will not be able to recognize him? It's in Yeshaya. Yeshaya was nisnabe about the Mashiach. But the Nevuah of Yeshaya, which has all about the Mashiach and Yemais Mashiach, there's one part which is very, very fascinating in that sense. And it talks basically about the Mashiach. The Medrash learns about Mashiach, the Rishonim learns, it talks about Klal Yisrael. But the truth of the matter, it talks about both. You see, it really refers to both. But the Ikka, Chazal says it refers to Mashiach. The Christians have taken it to refer to their false Mashiach. And we'll explain later on why it's false in that sense. But the fact that this parsha talks about Mashiach is Vadai. That's what Chazal tell us. It reveals to us what the Mashiach will look like. But what Yeshaya was nisnabe in his Nevuah was that the fact that the Mashiach will be in a state of kilkul. Now you may say, what is the Nevuah of Yeshaya fundamentally? What is Yeshaya teaching me? That the Mashiach is in a state of kilkul? Not really. By Yeshaya describing the fact that the Mashiach will be in a state of kilkul, he's really telling us the following: that the Mashiach will not arrive be'ita, be'achishena, but he will arrive be'ita. That's what the Nevi'us of Yeshaya is. Yeshaya saw b'Nevi'us fundamentally that when the Mashiach does finally arrive, he will be b'kilkulai, not b'tikunai, because when he does arrive, it's going to be be'ita and not be'achishena. And he describes what the Mashiach will look like at that time. These are very deep psukim that are tremendous yisoyos. We will now begin to spend time on this psukim, and fundamentally what we're going to go into now is what exactly is the yisuin of the Mashiach. Now, before I go into it, one more point. When I say the yisuin of the Mashiach, remember, there's the yisuin of the Yechid itself, that fact that's in the Klippa. But specifically, we're talking about the yisuin of the person who will be the Mashiach, who is now connected to that Yechida at the end, even while the Yechida is in the Klippas. You see, he is the one that really bears the brunt. it is the actual Mashiach who Yeshaya is really talking about. The one who has the Yechidah, but that Yechidah is still in a state of Kilkul, and it's the Mashiach in the Ikvus the Mashiach. Yeshaya starts as following. It's in Yeshaya Nun Beis Pasuk Yud Gimel. It starts. Hine Yaskel Avdi. Behold, my servant shall prosper, shall become wise. Avdi refers to the Mashiach. V'yom, v'nosa, v'gova mi'oid. He will be lifted and raised, and he will become very high. That's what it says. The pasuk says, Hine Yaskel Avdi. It's referred to Mashiach, and it fundamentally says that the Mashiach will suddenly be raised and lifted very high. Where? High from what? From the klippus, from his hashchasa. That's what Yeshaya is saying. Now, I will discuss what this means later on. What Hine Yaskel Avdi means. We'll go into that later on. But fundamentally, Yeshaya is beginning to talk about the Mashiach, and he's saying that the Mashiach is going to be raised very high. From where? From the fact, from his low position. He is in a state of a low position, a kilkul, a terrible kilkul, an ashchasa. He would be raised from that. How far would be raised? So Chazal say, it says, Yom v'nosa v'gava. Those are three Lashonos that mean to raise or to elevate. So Chazal say, Hine Yaskel Avdi, Yom mi Avraham Avinu, he will be higher than Avraham, v'nosa, and he will be elevated from Moshe Rabbeinu, v'gava, even from the Malach HaShoros. That's how high the Mashiach will go. The Mashiach will go from a state of absolute kilkul to a state of absolute tikkun in a very short period of time. Where do you see this Yisod also? That the Mashiach will go from a very low state to a very high state in the Moshe Mashiach very rapidly, because Klal Yisrael, that will also happen to Klal Yisrael. Klal Yisrael in the Ikvus Mashiach is also in a very low state. Correct? But right as soon as the Mashiach appears, Klal Yisrael will also instantly be elevated very rapidly into a very high state. You see? That's why in a certain way these psukim also refer to Klal Yisrael. Just like Klal Yisrael and Ikvus Mashiach will be in the lower state spiritually, and right after that, the Moshe Mashiach, they will be in the higher state, so the Mashiach will also be in the lower state instead of Kilkul, and suddenly he will go to the higher state. Where do you see this? Also, you see this in davening in Hallel. You see, peacefully Shari Tzedek, Avoibom, peacefully Shari Tzedek, Avoibom Oideyah. Now start the psukim. This entire thing, Min HaMeitza, really refers to the Tzar of the Mashiach and the Tzar of Klal Yisrael. Min HaMeitza, of course, from the distress I'm calling the Bnei Shalom. And at the end it says the following. I thank you because you afflicted me, Vatahi, and the affliction, that's the Hanogat HaYichud, the affliction, Yisur in itself, Li Lishua, Vatahi Li Lishua, that's the Hanogat HaYichud. Even more Atu Abonim, Hoyusol Rosh Pina, the Evan, the stone, in which the builders despised, they said, this stone is the most despised of the entire building. Hoyusol Rosh Pina, this became the cornerstone of the whole building. That which was utterly despised, that which was utterly in a state of kilkul, became the highest thing. That's the Mashiach. For something to go from a state of total kilkul to such tremendous kilkul, to a state of tremendous kedusha, could only be from the Bnei Shalom. This must be from the Bnei Shalom. This is something niflos and noiros. So we see that's the union of Hallel that it's talking about, this ascension from a very low state to a very high state. Now let us return again back to Yeshaya. Yeshaya says again, Hine Yaskel Avdi v'yom v'nosa v'gov mi'oid. Kasher shamamu olecha Rabbim. Just as the Rabbim, as the multitude, were horrified when they saw the Mashiach. We're talking about when people see the Mashiach and the Mashiach. It says, Kasher shamamu, they were horrified, olecha Rabbim. Just as people. What was the low state? Just as people were horrified, when the public were horrified, when they perceived the Mashiach. Came Mishchas me Ishmael v'Torah ben Adam. This is the thing. It's describing the matter of the Mashiach b'Kilkuloi. It says, Mishchas me'isha ma'ayu. When you look at him, you will see a tremendous hashchasa. Not only the hashchasa, v'toyim be'adam. The hashchasa and the kilkul that he has is such that it's so powerful that it makes him into a less than even an adam. You see, in other words, he carries around in his nefesh, ubazabo b'nafshay, in his nefesh, in his neshama, he has a very severe illness to such that it makes him behave, or makes him in certain patterns in his behavior, obviously it refers to here, in such a way that it appears to be something which normal people don't do. It's a true hashchasa. You understand what I'm saying? Kein mishchas me'ish ma'eu. His mara is mishchas me'ish. From a normal person, his tzura, his behavior is such that it's even makulkul. It's deteriorated. It's not of a normal behavior. V'toya roim ben adam. So the pasuk was kein yaze goyim abim olav. And the goyim, the nations will be shocked. Yikpetzu malachim kiyam. The kings will just open their mouths in astonishment. Why? Because when the Mashiach suddenly appears b'tikunai, when he's cured and he's b'tikunai, the nations of the world and the goyim will be totally astounded that this guy was the Mashiach. Why? Ki asher lo yisupa lehem mo. Because that which they have never heard before, they suddenly see. V'asher lo yishamo uzbonu. And suddenly they will understand something which has never been known since the beginning of time. When they see this Mashiach in a state of kilkul, and suddenly they see him in a state of tikkun, and they understand the process, they will be staggered that such a thing could even happen, and they will understand it to the verse. Mihem min lishmuosenu, uzvur Hashem al miniglosa. Who can believe that such a thing could happen? That the even more so that the stone which everyone was nimas because of the Ashchasa suddenly became the Mashiach himself. That person who no one could believe would even be anything, would even be a shamus in a shul. You see, it's suddenly the Mashiach himself. Then he goes on, Nivzech v'chadal ishim, that the Mashiach in Kilkuloi is Nivzeh, he's in a state of bezoyon. Ishmach oivos v'yodoya choli, he's a man of great pains, and cholom and sickness. Ukemaste ponim mimeno, Nivzeh v'loi chashavnu, he's a person with tremendous sickness so that no one would even consider him, even as a regular person. Now, the goyim who see this, and the people, the goyim, not only goyim, but the yidden who see this, say the following: Ochein chaloenu hu nosa. Now here's the thing, and this is, we're going through very, very difficult inyanim. The people will say, the goyim and the yidden who see the Mashiach suddenly come out in a state of tikkun will say the following: Ochein he has borne our disease. You see, it's our disease that he has borne. And it is our it's our deterioration, our pains which he will savour. And we thought that he was a man who was cursed from God. You see, and he was menuga, he was plagued with a terrible disease. You see. Now, but what we understand is the following: if he was profaned, if he was in such a state of profanation, it's because of our pshoim, our chatoim. That's what the world will say, and the Jews. If he was crushed, it was because of our avonis, not himself. Musta shleimenu olav, ubechabuosay nipolonu. We were cured. We had killed because of his Yisuan. Nigash v'hunane. Go on. It goes on. Sukum. Nigash v'hunane v'lo yiftach piv. Kasela tovach divor. He never said a word about his Yisuan. He was like a sheep that wanted to slaughter. And like a ewe lamb that was about to be shorn. But he never said anything. He bore his Yisuan. without complaining. Vayitim is Rishoyim Kivoy. I'm skipping number psukim, I don't want to read the whole thing. Vayitim is Rishoyim Kivoy. And they buried him among the Rishoyim. Why? Because they thought that he was a Rasha.
That means he dies?
No, it means they would like to have buried him. He doesn't die. So the Bonishim says at the end, "B'tikunoi, lochein achalet le'barabim, but atzumim yechalek sholol. I will count them among the mighty. Hachat asher he'ero la'moves nafshoi v'et ha'poshim nimno, because he bore up unto death tremendous yisurim. V'hu chet lab nosa v'la'poshim nafil, and he bore the chatoim of Klal Yisrael." You see where the psukim are? You see what the psukim says? You can't begin to understand the incredible Yisurin which is involved in this Parsha, in terms of what the Mashiach ben Yosef has to bear. Ephraim, Mashiach Tzidki. Now, the Psukim clearly talk about a man, a living man, who has to suffer enormously, so that he has a tremendous sickness in his nefesh, in such a way that people are not machshivim and they mavada him as a person who's menuga, who's almost like plagued with saras, with leprosy. A person who no one would even consider has any worth whatsoever. That's how people will look at him, you see. And then from that, people will suddenly realize that this man is the Mashiach. This is the Yeshua of Klal Yisrael. This Hashchosa, this Kilkul, this is the Tikkun of the Bria. This is what Klal Yisrael has been waiting for 5,000, for almost 6,000 years. This man who sits on the road and binds his wounds over and over again, who's a sick man, who's an oni roichav al hamor, who's a man riding on a hamor, an oni, a dal who's in the ashpa. That's where the Yeshua of Klal Yisrael lies. Why? Because that is what Klal Yisrael is itself, and he is a mere reflection of Klal Yisrael itself. And not for the fact that he didn't bear their Yisurim. If it wasn't for the fact that he bore their Yisurim, then all of Klal Yisrael and the word would be completely consumed in the din. That's what the Psukim, that's what Yeshaya is saying. That this is what the Mashiach will look like ultimately when he comes Be'ita, in that way. He will be a person that will not be recognized as Mashiach whatsoever. Now these Psukim are very deep in many ways. And I can spend long periods of time on some of these psukim, and I will in the next series of things. When it says and he is diseased because of al chatoim, the implication of these psukim are very vast. But in order to go into that, we have to go into a whole new area about the chet of Adam Rishon and the entire consequence of a chet. We will not do this specifically right now. We will go into more general. What I would like to point out from the Psukim is an instant thing, that the Mashiach is in a state of kilkul, and anyone who looks at him will be mavada him. That's fundamentally what it's going to be, in a state of bezoyan. And to such an extent where his bezoyan will become known to many peoples, in that sense. The question is why? Why does the Banishim want it known? Let him be a person who just has Yisuin in private. Why does this Yisuin have to become known? Why does he have to live in a state of busha and cherpa and bezoyan among many peoples? So that finally he will even get known to very big people like kings and the Goyish nations, that they will know this. See, by examining his life and so on, they will know exactly what the situation is. Why does the Banishim want this revealed to all of mankind? Herein lies the Moedik Chochmah. The Banishim wants to see the Mashiach of Klal Yisrael. The Banishim wants the Goyim to see the Mashiach of Klal Yisrael. And this is their astonishment. Why is astonishment? What do the Goyim think? The Christians and the Muslims and all the Goyim of the world. They think that the Jews, right, are the lowest people on earth, and that they have the Shlita, the Oizim, the Tiferes, and the Bria, right, which they possess. But they think that because of the fact that they are the highest in the world and they control the Bria, right? That this is the natural order of things. This is their Hatzlacha. You see? In other words, the fact that the Jews are so low and that the Goyim are so high and control the world, this is a simon that what they have, you see, is an emet hatzlacha. It's a simon that the emes lies with them and the sheker lies with Klal Yisrael. In fact, many times the Goyim believe that the reason why the Jews have suffered through so many years in all the exile and so on is because of the fact that the Jews killed their false Mashiach. That's why the Jews have to suffer. So when Jews got back Israel in 1948, the Vatican didn't know what to do, and they still don't recognize Israel, because Israel is a fundamental religious contradiction to the entire Christianity. Because if the Jews have to suffer because they killed Jesus and so on, they wouldn't accept them, why is it that suddenly they're coming back to the state of Israel? The Christians cannot explain it, and that's why the Vatican has no diplomatic relations with Israel, you see. But fundamentally what the Goyim believe is that the Jews are the lowest of the people, and that the Christians, or they, the people themselves, are the highest. They have the emes, the Jews are the sheker, you see. So what happens is, fundamentally, when they see the Mashiach of Klal Yisrael, and they see that he's a mushkas, they laugh. They don't even recognize the Mashiach. And suddenly one day, when the Mashiach is overturned, and the person who was in the state of Hashchosa is now the highest man in the Bria, they're shocked. They're saying, wait a minute, this is incredible. If the Mashiach was in such a state of Hashchosa, and suddenly he's such an incredible tzaddik, that means that the emes was really in the mud. You see, that the entire situation in the world was overturned. That really emes was really in the mud. It was in the mud, and it was in the terrible. It was hidden, totally concealed. You see, well, if the emes was totally concealed, then the sheker was completely revealed. You see, so they realized, wait a minute, this is an incredible thing. We were the highest people in the world. So obviously, just like if we are the highest people in the world, and we have the entire koyach, that itself is a hashchasa. You see, that's a hashchasa. Just like when the emes, if the Mashiach was in a state of kilkul, and that's where the emes was, obviously just like the emes is in a state of kilkul, right? And that's a hashchasa of emes. The fact that we, the goyim, are the most matzliach in the world is also a hashchasa. You see, that's what they will understand. They will learn from the Mashiach that they themselves are mushchasim. You see, that the true hashchasa is not that the Mashiach is in a state of kilkul, but that they are in a state of gedula. That's the hashchasa, which is synonymous with hashchasa Mashiach. That's when they can understand. You see, because then they'll realize, wait a minute, we believe, they're going to say, the Goyim will say, the Christians, we believe in Jesus the Messiah. And they believe that Jesus is a very holy person. Right? So therefore, their concept of the Mashiach is so very high. But then when they look at the real Mashiach and they see that he's very low, they're going to realize that their Hatzlacha and their false Mashiach, right, and the entire Hatzlacha that was associated with them is Hashchosa itself. That it's unnatural, it should never been. That the only reason why they are in a state of Gedula and Hatzlacha is because the Mashiach in Klal Yisrael is in a state of Hashchosa. You see. But both of these things represent Hashchosa. If that's Hashchosa, then what's the Tikkun? The Tikkun is for Klal Yisrael and the Mashiach to be in a state of Gedula, and that they should be in a state of Yerida. You see, that's the emes. And that's what they're going to learn by the Mashiach. When they're going to see when they're going to see what the Mashiach really looks like and what he was like before he appeared as Mashiach, they're going to realize that the kilkul of the Mashiach is synonymous with their kilkul, and their kilkul was Hatzloch itself. The fact that they're Matzliach, this is a kilkul. This is also Hashchosa. And just like in the end, in the emergent Mashiach, everything, the emes will come back. And when the emes comes back, the Hashchosa will be removed. The Mashiach will be in a state of kilkul, tikkun, and will become a very, very big tzaddik. And they will be in a state of Yerida. That's the emes. That's why it says here, Malachim Kopsapiyam, that kings must be astonished. You see why? Because they realize that the entire Malchus of Edom and the Malchus of the world is Hashchot itself. You see, that the only reason why they were kings is because the Malchus of the Banisham was in the Klippus. That's why. But when it's restored, when the Malchus goes back to the Banisham through the Mashiach, especially the Mashiach from David, then the Malchus will be taken away from the Goyim, and no longer will they have any Shvita at all. They will be restored to their true emes. And what's the emes? That they have to be avodim, and that they have to have Yerida. That's their emes. It's only when the emes was in a state of kilkul that suddenly they became so big. But when the emes is restored, then they will go back to their emes, which is to be in a state of Yerida. When the Goyim realize that, as strange as it may sound, they will be happy. Because the truth of the matter is, whenever something is in an unnatural state, it tends to be in a state of tension. And the same thing in a spiritual state. When a person is in a spiritual state, too high for his neshama to hold, or for his being to carry, he's really in a state of instability. You see, a person is most happy when he's in a state of stability, when the situation he's in is completely consistent with his inner being. It's the same thing with the Goyim. The fact that the Goyim rule the world and they have the shlita is really a state of tension. They themselves are very unhappy about it, even though they don't realize it. But when they're restored to their state, which is really a state lower than Klal Yisrael, much lower, they will become happy, because then they will have shaykhs to ruchnius. You see, right now the Goyim have no shaykhs to ruchnius. Why? Because they're in a deviant state. You see, when they're in the top and the Jews in the bottom, so what happens? The ruchnius is in the klippas, and nobody has shaykhs to ruchnius, neither the Jews or the Goyim, because the world is in a distorted, deviant state. But when it's restored, when the Jews go up and they go down, and then suddenly ruchnius goes out of the klippas, you see, and ruchnius goes to the world, the Jews will have ruchnius and the Goyim will have ruchnius. But the Goyim will have ruchnius, or the kedusha of the world, ruchnius, when they're in their natural state, which is in the state of being lower than the Jews. You see, that's when they can really begin to feel also a tremendous simcha and toiv as well. You see, that's when it says, you call it Beis Tefillah l'chol ha'amim. You see, that what do you call it? That the Beis HaMikdash will become a sanctuary, a mikdash for all the ummahs of the world, every one of them, and they will be happy in that state. The question that we have to discuss is, what exactly is the hashchos of the Mashiach? What is the Yisurin of the Mashiach itself? Can we get a better understanding of that? The truth of the matter is, to understand the Yisurin of the Mashiach is to understand the very inner pnimius of the Hanogas HaYichud itself and of the whole Bria. But we can get a certain glimpse of what that is. Basically speaking, the Mashiach, especially the Mashiach Ben Yosef, when he's alive and he's a person, has two basic Yisurim. There are two things that are wrong with him. There are two Yisurim, fundamentally, that the Mashiach Ben Yosef, especially, is Sovel. Two basic Yisurim. The first is called Cheson Or, and the second one is called Hashchosas Kfiyat Hayetza. We shall discuss each one separately. Cheson Or. What is the Cheson Or? We have, if you recall, defined to a certain extent what the Mashiach Ben Yosef is. We have said that the fundamental tachlis of the Mashiach Ben Yosef is to be Megala, the tzura of the Torah, right, which is necessary to bring the tikkun in the Bria at that time. If you recall, the Mashiach is the conduit, or the channel in which the Oris, or the new Oris of the Torah, the new tzura flow through, and he reveals this to Klal Yisrael. And then Klal Yisrael takes this Torah, and with this Torah, it's over towards its tikkun. Thus, Noach gave the Sheva mitzvahs. Moshe Rabbeinu was Megala the Tayag mitzvahs. In that sense, each Mashiach Ben Yosef is fundamentally the ones who are, is fundamentally is Megala, the tzur of the Torah, which is appropriate for that generation to bring the tikkun of that generation. You see. Now Moshe, of course, was much bigger. Moshe was really Megala the Torah in the Tayag mitzvahs, which really was the finished tzura. That Torah was supposed to bring the case, the Gilur, the Yemot Mashiach. It failed to do it, however, because of the hate of the Egel. But that was its fundamental function. Now, the Mashiach Ben Yosef at the end, as we said, will get the Yechida, which he will then come to understand the Or HaGonos itself, which is the light that from then he will be understand the entire Pnimius of the Bria. Now, the Mashiach Ben Yosef in the Ikaz Mashiach is in a very unusual state. Why? Because the question remains, the person who is a Mashiach, you see, who has that capacity, is he masig the Oris of the Torah before he becomes an actual Mashiach? In other words, when that Mashiach is in a potential state, you see, and therefore he doesn't have the Yechidah yet, and therefore he doesn't have the Uris yet, you see. Fundamentally we say that he doesn't really have possession of those Uris yet. However, the actual Mashiach in the end is in a very unique position. And it is a very painful position. What is that position? Because of the fact that he is the one who will be destined to be Magala, the Torah of the Truth Akesa, which is the Torah and the True in the time of the Mashiach, right? In the Yemais Mashiach, right? When does he get those Oris? Does he get those Oris when he actually becomes the Mashiach? Or does he have those Oris even before he's Mashiach? When he's in the Ikhlas Mashiach? The answer is, he has it even before. And this is the incredible suffering that he has to go through. He doesn't have it to the fullest extent. But since that person, since that Mashiach ben Yosef is connected to the Yechidah in such a powerful fashion, the Oris of that Torah, which is in the future yet, which mankind is not Zercha to. Why? Because those Oris are in the Klippa. Remember, it's in the Klippas. The Oris, you have to understand, the Oris of Klal Yisrael that they have at any particular point are Oris that they're Zercha to. The Uris that Klal Yisrael do not have yet, you see, because they're in the future. The Uris of the Torah, which are yet in the future, which Klal Yisrael does not have, they don't have because of the Kittub, because of the Chatoim. The Uris are in the Klippa. The Uris in the future, the Or Torah, of the Tzura Torah, which is not yet revealed to Klal Yisrael, is in the Klippas. And therefore the Kittub does not allow that Torah to come out. You see, and therefore it cannot be used by Klal Yisrael for an ultimate tikkun. Klal Yisrael is only zercha to the oris which they can have at that moment in time, depending on the schusim. If they're in a certain state of schus, then they're zercha to a certain level. But they cannot be zercha to a higher level of Torah because it would be disastrous for them. It would destroy them. You see. Now the Mashiach, who lives in the Mashiach, in that time before he becomes the actual Mashiach, or the Mashiach Yosef, does not have those Oris fully yet, because he's not the Mashiach yet. But since he will be the actual Mashiach, then he is the one who has certain Mitzutim, or certain Ashpor of that Or HaGonas, which eventually will come down to the entire world. But he has those Oris, you see, in a time when the Kippur gets very, very powerful, and it doesn't belong there. The Mashiach ben Yosef, in the Ikhlas Mashiach, is masid, Chokhmah, and Torah in such a way that no one else could be masid that in that point in time. Because Klal Yisrael cannot be zercha to that. Not only that, because of the fact that those Oris are in the Klippa, the Sultan does not allow those Oris to come down. So even though they trickle down to the Mashiach himself, he cannot develop them. He cannot bring it down. It's like, it's like he tastes this incredible thing, but he cannot fulfill himself. You see? He can't bring down all the Oris that he wants to. He has a tremendous taiva. You see? To be masik all these Oris, to bring down this tremendous chokhmah, this tremendous awe pnimi. But he can't. He can't bring it down. Why? Because he's living in the Ikhlas Mashiach. He's not a Mashiach yet. You see? And the Oris are on the Klippa. They're in the Kitrugim. The Sultan will not leave them go by. And when the Sultan does give it to him, to the Mashiach, which he has to, because the Neshama is connected to the Yechidah, he gets those Oris through the Klippa. It's very painful, because he can't do anything with it. All he can do is see it and suffer. He can see it, develop it a little bit, but he must constantly agonize over the fact that he knows these chokhmas and that he has the ability to do all these things without having the ability to be mashlim and working the thing out to its fullest thing. That is the Yisurin, or what's called the Chason Or, that the Mashiach ben Yosef suffers because the Or which his Neshama should have, which his Neshama needs for a tikkun, he does not have. He only has slight trickles of that. And that slight thing that he has is a source of immense pain, because he constantly sees what he cannot have. He constantly sees what the Yeshua of the entire Bria will be. He knows, more than anyone else, obviously, what the Yemais Mashiach will look like. He knows that. Because, you see that? He knows this. Yet he cannot bring down that awe, except in a very small amount. So this is a tremendous source of temptation for him, and a tremendous source of Yisurin. You see, it's like a person who's starving. You see, who hasn't eaten in many, many, many days. Is suddenly given a little food, but just food, just enough to just satisfy him, just not even satisfy him. All it does is simply they give him something, maybe a gram of some food, and he puts it in his mouth, and he just tastes the hanor, and that's it, and they take it away. He agonizes. You see, that's what the Mashiach ben Yosef is in the Ikkas Mashiach. He has the Chasson or. He doesn't have the or Pnimi in its fullest. He only has it in its lowest madrega, and therefore he knows what the Yemos Mashiach is. He knows what that emes will be. He knows what Klal Yisrael will be like in the future time.
Is he also not that he is the Mashiach?
We'll go into that. Leave that go for a second. You see, he knows that. And he knows what the ultimate Yeshua will be. He knows what the ultimate Simcha will be. He can feel all of that. But he can't have it. He can't have it because it's in the Klippas. And the Klippas won't allow Klal Yisrael to have it, obviously. And they won't allow the Mashiach to have it. But he suffers more than all of them. Why? Because he knows what it is. They don't. That's the Einish of the Mashiach. That's the Yesud of the Mashiach, rather. That's the Einish of Klal Yisrael. We'll see. Klal Yisrael doesn't even know what they're missing. They don't know. Because Klal Yisrael isn't a true state of Ashchasa. It's a real Ashchasa. It's a Ashchasa which they are responsible for. They created their Ashchasa. But the Mashiach has to be served that Ashchasa of Klal Yisrael. How? You see? Because he gets to see what Klal Yisrael should have, but can't have. He gets to see it, he gets to feel it, he gets to taste it. And he can't have it. That would have been the Einish of Klal Yisrael had they been aware of their Ashchasa. If Klal Yisrael was aware of the fact of what the Emes of Torah was and the Emes, what two Yerushalayim and the Vekas, what the two Churban Beis HaMikdash was, they would agonize on it. But they don't agonize because they don't see it. They're in such a deep state of Ashchasa, they don't even know they're in a state of Ashchasa, you see. So who has to agonize for them? The Mashiach has to agonize for them. He has to know what there is, and he can't have it. That is the Yesud of the Chasson Or and Mirat Ashpah. That he has a slight Ashpah from the Or Pnimi, from the Or Gonas. Slight. Just enough to tempt him, and just enough to torture him. And that is all.
Do you know what he said?
Not only this, as part of the Chasson Or, not only does Mashiach know what the future Torah will look like, not only does he see what the future Dveikus will look like, but there's another agony that comes along with that. He sees it in the Klippas. Because he knows what it is. He knows exactly what it looks like when it's in the Klippas. He understands as no other man what it means. He sees the Tzfat B'Yatzor. He sees it and he understands it. And he agonizes because of the fact that it is B'Yatzor. You see. This is the basic Yesud that has to do with the Chasson Or. His Yesud comes from the fact that he lacks the Or, and that he comes from the fact that he sees the Or in a Mokum of Tunah, in a Mokum of Hashchos, of Kilkul, you see. And that causes immense, immense pain, which he serves constantly. The Yesud of the Mashiach ben David is similar. However, the problem is the following. The Mashiach ben David doesn't suffer in the same fashion, in that way. Fundamentally, the Meshachim of the Mashiach ben David is really in the state of the Yechida itself, basically. But the person of the Mashiach ben David does not suffer in that fashion. Right? Basically, if the suffering is from the Mashiach ben Yosef. That's where the Ika suffering as a person is the Mashiach ben Yosef. Mashiach ben David doesn't suffer really in that way. The reason why the Mashiach ben Yosef suffers much more than Mashiach ben David in that sense. First of all, it's not the Mashiach ben Yosef to be Matar the Bria. He's the one who's got to get rid of the Kilkul. So he's the one who has to be, he's a Shliach fundamentally of the Anodas HaYichid, basically, mostly. That's number one. Number two, it is the Ikatachos of the Mashiach ben Yosef to remove the Klippa, to remove the Golas, and to be Magala, the new Or, you see. So he's the one that has to suffer on that Or, in that sense. But as he suffers, there's a Tachlis to it. He saves Klal Yisrael. And not only that, as he suffers, he slowly pulls out the Yechida from the Klippas. His agony over the Yechida pulls it out of the Klippas itself. See, that's the Tachlis. And that's what the Banashim said to Yosef, Fire Mashiach Tzidki. Le'eved nimka Yosef. the Basel Bo Benafsho. Yosef was sold for an eved, in that sense. And Basel Bo Benafsho, an iron yoke is a nefesh, so that his nefesh is serval this kind of tremendous Yisuin. But he brings the tikkun. It's his koyach and his avodah which brings the last of the tikkun of Klal Yisrael itself. This is what the pasuk in Yeshaya means. Hine yaskil abdi. The word yaskil, hine yaskil means to suddenly become wise, in that sense. Now, what the Ramchal says is the following: is that the Mashiach in the Ikvis Mashiach, when he's masik the Argonis in a very small way, right? And he's very pained by that. That's represented by the letter Samach. By the letter Samach. We won't go to why. It's represented by the letter of Samach. It's because the word Samach is the word Schal.
So is a chol.
Foolishness. Schal. It's symbolized by the Samach. That's where that chok for the Orgunas in its slightest state, which comes down in Dikn Shikha, is represented by the Samach. However, when the Yechida goes out of the Klippa and comes down on the Mashiach itself, suddenly the ore jumps and becomes very powerful. It's no more trickle, because it's not in the Klippa anymore. As soon as he comes down, suddenly there's a tremendous deal of this new ore of the Torah B'tuzah Keter. That's represented by the letter, the sin. The sin. Like in the word Seichel. You see. And then finally, when the Mashiach has the Or, the Yechida, you see, as soon as the Mashiach is released from the Klippa, the Yechida is released, then the Mashiach suddenly goes to a new level of Gilui. He's Makabel the Torah like Moshe Rabbeinu. We shall get into that later on. The Mashiach goes to the level of the sin. And that's for the union of Seichel. You see. And then he begins to grow and gets wiser and wiser, until finally he has the full power of the Yechida, and he's masking the Argonas itself. That's represented by the letter Shin. Shin. So the Mashiach goes from the Madreg of Sin, Samach, to Sin, to Shin. And that's what the Pasuk says, Hine Yaskil Abdi. Yaskil is sin, Seicha. What Yeshaya is telling us, that before that, before the Hine Yaskil Abdi, before the Mashiach becomes wise and goes out of the Klippas, he's in the Madreg of a Samach. But suddenly he goes, Hine Yaskil Abdi, my servant the Mashiach becomes Seicha. He comes to the level where the Yechida goes out of the Klippa, and he's Zeicha to the beginning of the two Argonas in its full form. And then, the Yoram, the Nasa, the Dova, and then he goes higher and higher, until he reaches the stage of the Shin, which is the stage of the full power of the Argonas. At that point, he is completely out of the Klippa, and he is totally B'tikunai. You see, completely B'tikunai. And Klal Yisrael is B'tikunai also. The Samach represents the Argonas in a state of Kilkul. The sin, which is the sin with the dot on the left side, the highest, smallest, represents the Argonas in its lower state. And the Shin, which is the sin with the dot on the right side, represents the Argonas in its higher state, which is the completed state of the Argonas itself, and the actual perception of the Mashiach in terms of the Torah B'tuzah Keter. The Shin represents the Torah in its final state, in the ultimate Surah, which is B'tuzah Keter, where the Panim and the Chitin of the Torah is one, as we've discussed before. That's represented by the Shin. That's where the Shleimus of the Torah is completely finished. This is an understanding of the first type of Yisuin of the Mashiach ben Yosef, which is the Chson or Or. However, as I mentioned, there's another type of Yisuin that the Mashiach ben Yosef has, which is called the Ashchosas Kfiyas HaYetzer. Now, what exactly is that? That really is the nature of the Ashchos itself. What exactly is the Ashchos itself of the Mashiach? Well, in order to understand the Ashchos of the Mashiach, the Ashchos Kfiyas HaYetzer means that the Mashiach ben Yosef is in a state where his Yetzer Hara is so powerful that he's forced to do Chatoim. But since he's forced to do Chatoim, they're not Chatoim, because he has no Bechira. Let me explain what I'm talking about. You all heard of the concept of Gehenna. You know what Gehenna is? The Ramchal says a very interesting thing of what Gehenna is. For example, Ramchal says, he describes what the actual einish of Gehenna is. Let's say, for example, a person in this world doesn't want to put on tefillin. He doesn't want to put on tefillin. He has bechila, right? He can either put on or not. Let's say he doesn't want to put on tefillin. Okay? Or let me give a better example. Let's say in this world, the person doesn't want to eat, unfortunately, doesn't want to observe kashrus. He happens to like bacon and pork and lobster. He's machal as a suit. He wants to eat it. He knows he's not supposed to eat it. He knows that. He knows that. But he says, I don't care. I'm political. I want to eat it. Fine. So then what happens? A pagam comes down in the neshama. A kilkel comes down in the neshama. When that person dies and goes to Gehenna, what happens? How is that kilkel removed? I'll tell you exactly how it's removed. The person is forced in a ruchnistic way to eat chazer and lobster. You see, but the problem is that up there when he's in Gehenna, he's masik the oiris of kedusha already, because he's no longer in this world. He's in a neshama. So he's masik the entire thing. He sees the emes. So when he's forced to eat chaza, and he's forced to do, it's a tremendous star for him. Because as he's eating chaza, as he's got his neck down to the table, in a sense, and his head is pushed into a plate of lobster, in that sense, and he's forced to guzzle it down, it's tremendously painful for his neshama. Because as he's taking it down, he's losing the Uris. He's being more and more farther and farther away from the Uris. There's a richok from Uris. Now, of course, this is metaphorical. He doesn't actually eat lobster and bacon in that kind of sense. But it's the same thing. The way Gehenna is matar a person from his klipa is that it forces him to do the same averis that he did on this world, he redoes in Gehenna. Except that on this world, he has bechira. And there's no obvious consequence to the neshama. He doesn't see it. But in the next world, since he sees the MS, you see, in Gehenna, when he's forced to do the same averis, exactly the same thing, as he does these averis, what they do is they constitute mechitas to the MS, or to kedusha. Every time that he's forced to do one of these same things he did down on earth, what happens is the kedusha is blocked from him, and he's forced. But in that world, he feels it. He feels it when he doesn't have the kedusha. You see, so the neshama is murdik mitzvah, and that's his Gehenna. That is the function, and that's the way Gehenna takes place. You see, it makes what it does is it replicates all his maisim in Olam Hazeh, except there's no bechira. And as it replicates the maisim by forcing him to do the same thing, it's matayim and it's mavara the neshama away from the tumah that it has. That is the way that what do you call it is. The Ramchal says it's often in the Likutim that I saw, but that's the nature of Gehenna. What I'm saying follows the union of Midah Keneged Midah. You see, down here you have the choice to do it or not. You want to eat Macholat Yisuris, okay, you have the choice. Up there you don't have the choice. That's your Gehenna. And that's Midah Keneged Midah. You see. But up there, it's painful up there. Why? Because up there you feel the richok, the distance from Ruchnias. You feel the barrier to Ruchnias as you are doing these maisim up there. So fundamentally, that's each person's Gehenna. Each person's Gehenna is nothing more than a duplication of the maisim he did down here, Baal Kocha, but Kfiyas Hayetza. With that Yesod, we can begin to understand the Yesod of the Mashiach.
You just translate literally.
The Ashchota means a deterioration, a disfigurement. Kfiyah means a pressure or an influence. The koifa is to force someone to do something. Koifa, I say, kfiyah. Hashchota's kfiyah sayeta means the Ashchota, the deterioration which comes to the Mashiach because of the kfiyah sayeta, because of the immense power of his Yetzer Hara, which forces him to do maisim, which normally would appear to be chatoim to any other person, but to him it's not a chet because he has to do it. Now, why is this thing happen? Now we understand, because since he has to be sovel, Yisurim of Klal Yisrael, their chatoim, how would they be sovel that Yisurim? They would be forced to do these averos in Gehenna, and when they do these averos, right, they would be nishchosim, right? Every malach and every neshama in Gan Eden looks down in Gehenna and sees these people in Gehenna are nishchosim, because they all have to do averos which takes them away from Luchnias. Do you understand? That's what they would see. Except that in Olam Hazeh, in the living world, people don't appear as nishchosim just because they do averos. It doesn't appear. Aha. But in order to truly remove the hashkot of Klal Yisrael, their einish would have been to do that. That is the suffering of the Mashiach, because the Mashiach has to suffer for them in that way. So he has to therefore take on the exact reflection of their chatoim. So what happens is that since the Yechida is in the Klippas, the Yechida is able to influence the Mashiach through the Yechida. You see, the Satan, since the Satan has the Yechida in the Klippa, right, and the Mashiach is attached to the Yechida, what happens is the Yetzer Hara comes to the Mashiach with a sledgehammer and says, Asay, do, and he has no choice, because it is so immensely powerful. The Hashchot is so immensely, the Yetzer Hara, for the particular Ma'aseh is so immensely powerful that he must involve himself in these things which would appear to be chatoim in the normal case. Why is it not a chet to the Mashiach? Because he has no choice. You see, that's his chelet, that's his yisurin. In order for him to be machapa and Klal Yisrael, he has to do what fundamentally they would receive. You see, that's why the Bnei Hashem says, Ephraim Mashiach Tzidki. Now you understand, because the Bnei Hashem says, wait a minute. Just because this man doesn't look like a Mashiach, now you see why the Bnei Hashem has to bavon the fact that he's still a tzaddik. The Bnei Hashem says, I want you to know that he's a tzaddik. He may not look like a tzaddik, but kukuloi. You see, because he looks like he's doing chatoim. He looks like he has ashchota. He looks like he has mitzvahs wars. He looks like in such a fact that you wouldn't consider him to be a shamas for a shul. You see, let alone to be the Mashiach, what do you call of Klal Yisrael, the Mashiach Hashem, in that sense. But I want you to know the Bnei Hashem says, he is a tzaddik. He is the highest tzaddik. And it only is because of the fact that he's connected to the highest neshama. And he is the highest tzaddik, that he has to be servile for Klal Yisrael. That's why he has the capacity to be servile for so many other people. Because if it weren't for him being servile, their ashchotza, if he didn't have their Gehenim now, you see, if he didn't have the Gehenim which Klal Yisrael should have because of their ashchotza, as he lives now on this world, Klal Yisrael would not be able to survive. So therefore, his einish, his ashchotza comes from the fact that he bears their Gehenim. And since their Gehenim, they would have to do this chatoim bal kocho, he has to do these averes bal kocho here. The Ramchal says in Taktu Tfilis, in the same Taktu Tfilis, it's interesting. His Maramas over there, he says over there that the Mashiach needs a very, very special Siyata Deshmaya, more than any other person. Why? And this is a very, very difficult thing for Mashiach. Because of the fact, and this is a very difficult thing, and now you will see the emes avoided Mashiach. The Mashiach is in a state where he's ashchota. That means that he's involved in actual Yetzer Haras, and he's actually involved in actual Ma'aseh, which are actual chatoim. Now, in these situations, he has no bechira. But does that mean that the Mashiach has no bechira itself? No. He does have bechira. The truth of the matter is, even in that state, the Mashiach ben Yosef has bechira. He does. He does. And it's with that bechira that he brings the gula. Because the Satan tries to destroy him even with that bechira. The Satan knows that he cannot destroy him with the ashchasa that he bears for Klal Yisrael. That's not him. But what the Satan tries to do is get him to be over chet on his own bechira, like he did by Yerovam ben Nevat. You see. But the problem is this, and this is where the problem of Mashiach ben Yosef and why he has a living Gehenna. You see. Because the Yetzer Hara is so powerful with him that he's forced to do many chatoim. You know, he's forced to be in the parsha, in that sense. But since he has his own bechira, he obviously doesn't have to go to the nth degree. But where do you draw the line? You see, the Mashiach has to know where to draw the line. He knows how much am I suffering because I have to do it, and how much am I don't have to do it. You see what I'm saying? So he's constantly in the state of knowing where and what to do, how far can he go and how not. You see what I'm saying? Not only that, since he's always in the state of ashchotza, he's always in the state of tremendous depression. He's always in a state of incredible misery because of the chesson or and because of the ashchotza. You see, you have to still the fall. It's like taking Moshe Rabbeinu and putting him into a Chinese restaurant and forcing him to eat trays of Chinese food. Moshe Rabbeinu, that's mamish what it is. You see, that's the Yisur involved. You have to understand what this thing is, what the individual is there. But not you take a person like that and through his entire life you force him to be involved in all these kinds of things, right? And yet you say, but you can't go too far. In other words, you're allowed to eat only this on the menu, but on the fifth item on the menu, you can't eat anymore. In other words, you have a great Yitzhak, some Beispiel, it's not exactly, I'm just giving an illustration. It's like Mashiach has an uncontrollable Yitzhak for pork, and all beef, and all pork products, and so on. But he has Bechir on lobster. You see? So what's involved is, he's forced to eat pork his entire life. He's mitzvah on the pork. And because he's mitzvah on the pork, he's in a state of horrible depression, and horrible activism and so on. And then he says, I can't stand this anymore, you know. And then suddenly they put a plate of lobster in front of him. Anyone would say, look, if I'm eating pork already, I want to eat lobster. What's the difference? You see? But he can't. He has to realize, wait a minute, I can't eat the lobster. Now, how does he know where to stop and where he doesn't? Where not? The truth is, he doesn't know where to stop. Because the truth of the matter is that most of the time that the Mashiach lives in Nikos Mashiach, he does not know that he's the Mashiach. And therein is the big catch to the entire situation. Most of the time that the Mashiach lives in Nikos Mashiach until the end, right before he goes in the level of the Yaskal Abdi, right before that when he's in the Klipa, right? And he's in Ashchota, he does not know that he is the Mashiach. Just like Moshe Rabbeinu did not know that he would be the Goyal of Klal Yisrael and give him the Torah before the snare. Before the Banishim said to him, look, I want to appoint you to go to Mitzrayim. Right? Right? Before that, did Moshe know that he was the one that can be Goyal Klal Yisrael? He didn't know. Because he was fighting with the Banishim, fundamentally. But he didn't know, in that sense. The Mashiach does not know that he's the Mashiach either. He knows that he's very strange, obviously. He obviously knows that. There's something very different about him. But he doesn't know that he's Mashiach any more than anyone else does. The heft is so great that there's a heft not only on Klal Yisrael, on the Bria, there's a heft on the Mashiach himself, in that kind of sense. That's how big the kittug is. So therefore, where does he take the information to know where he can and cannot do? He is in a constant state of confusion. You see, I'm trying to give you a picture of what his mental state must be like. You see, where he's in a state where he's massive levels of oris that are very, very strange, and he's tremendously agonizing about it. He's forced to do all kinds of chatroim that he doesn't want to do, and he doesn't want to have shaykh do, and he must do, you see. And then he gets so depressed about it, and so confused about it, that he can't even tell us where the Bechir is or not. And yet he must be very careful. You see. That is the mental state of the Mashiach ben Yosef, which is an agonizing mental state. Because mind you must remember one thing, which is a very, very important thing. That even though the Mashiach ben Yosef does not know that he's the Mashiach ben Yosef, he is in a very unusual state. Because you must remember, he is a person who's masig an awe that does not exist yet. Now that the Vekas, his capacity for Yiras Shamayim is awesome. Even in that state, obviously. Even in the state of Ashchota, he is born an incredible tzaddik. The Mashiach ben Yosef, when he's born, he is already a Kodesh and a tremendous tzaddik. Automatically, obviously, that's where the neshama is. He's shaykh to the Yechida. So he has tremendous ruchnius. He's not a person devoid of ruchnius. He's a person who's filled with incredible ruchnius and incredible kedusha. The Mashiach ben Yosef, when he's born, or when he's a child, or when he's an adolescent, had the same kedusha as a tremendous tzaddikim who had to be over for 50 years. And so obviously, because that's what he's born with. But at the same time, even though he has this tremendous ruchnius, he also has this tremendous kriyas hayetza, both acting at the same time. And therein lies one of the essential aspects of his agony, that he is a tzaddik, he is an incredible tzaddik, and he is a Rasha at the same time. In the same person, there exists two opposite worlds. There exists the world of the Yechida, which is the highest world of Kedusha, and there exists the world of the Klipa. And I don't mean a light Klipa. The Yechida, when I say it's in the Klipa, you know where it is? It's in the Klipa of Esav, like we said, in Tfez Gator. But in the worst level of Esav, Amalek, the neshama of the Mashiach ben Yosef, the Yechida, is in Amalek, who is total Ra. You see, you can see the agony of his mental experience. You see, that he's masig, he has such shaykhs, such immense ruchnius, and he is in such an incredible makom tumah. such that the hashchasa doesn't allow him to be a normal human being. And yet, with all that, he still has to have bechira. He still has to know where to draw the line. He can't be moira heta and let go all the way. He can't say, forget it, it's ridiculous, it'll never work out, you know? He can't say that. He can't be miyayish. But at the same time, he can't go anywhere. He can't get anywhere. Do we begin to perceive the state of what the Mashiach ben Yosef is? And this is Mashiach. It's a very unusual state. It's an agonizing state. The truth of the matter is, there is no other person who has ever had that kind of experience except one other. There is one other person who has felt what the Mashiach ben Yosef has felt. Only one other person, possibly another, but I'm not sure. But there's only one other person who has ever felt that state. Adam HaRishon. Since Adam HaRishon, no one has ever felt what he has felt. Why? Aha. And let's look into it. What was the meaning of Adam HaRishon? Adam HaRishon before the Chet was in a very high madrega of Kedusha, wasn't he? Adam HaRishon before the Chet was masik, tremendous earth. He was masik a level of Torah, which was before the Chet, which had no Zoyama. That way was masik, had no klipa. It was simply in a state of Chasson, but not in a state of Kilkul. So he was masik, tremendous earth. But when he did the Chet, what happened? He went into the klipas, right? And the Torah went into the klipas. So after that, his Torah was a totally different Torah. But did he remember what his Torah was before the Chet? He definitely did. He definitely did. And that was the unique ownership of Adam HaRishon, which no other man ever had. You ever wonder an interesting question? When the Hashem cursed Adam, the curses that he gave Adam apply to all mankind, right? Isn't that true? Misa, everything, all the klolos that went to Adam went to all mankind. But the fundamental question was, wait a minute, but who was the man that did it? Who was the man that actually did the chet? Adam. So therefore it's only right that in some way Adam should suffer a unique kind of Yisurin that no one else has to suffer. Because he really is the person. He was a conglomeration of all the shamas that really did the chet. See? So the question is, what is the unique thing that Adam suffers that no other man suffers? Because he was the man that actually did the sin. This is the answer. What Adam suffered was that only Adam knew what Adam was before the chet. Adam remembered the Adam before the chet. And he had to live with that memory even after the chet. In other words, he was in the same state as Mashiach. He remembered what those Uris were. He remembered that thing. So therefore, he lived later on after the chet, he was in a klipa. So that means that he was in a state of chasson awe. You see. So the Adam had the same Yisur as Mashiach ben Yosef, except they are both inverse. Adam had greater Uris before and less earth after. So the suffering of Adam HaRishon was that he remembered what the original earth was, that he no longer had access to. He had to suffer because he knew what they were, and he knew that tremendous emes, and he couldn't have shaykhs to it. He knew that tremendous ruchnius, and he didn't have shaykhs to it. That was the suffering of Adam HaRishon, personally, you see. But the Mashiach ben Yosef also suffers in the same way, except that he suffers with the earth which will be in the future, not in the past. You see, Adam HaRishon suffers because of the Uris, the higher Uris that he lost. The Mashiach ben Yosef suffers because of the higher Uris that he has yet to gain. You see? That's the difference between the two. But it doesn't matter. They have the same kind of suffering. Because both of them are aware of higher Uris even though they are in a lower state. You see? And no other person has ever had that. Because after Adam HaRishon, no one knew what Adam went through. No one had the memory of what Adam had before the chet. You see? Because everyone was only after the chet. So therefore, there was no other person ever born that was aware of a madrig of Torah or Tzura Torah which is greater than that which existed or was prevalent in the door that he lived. Except for Adam and the Mashiach ben Yosef. All the tzaddikim of all the time and so on do not have they do not have this Yisur. Why? Because no matter how big they are, they don't have shaykhs to the Yechid in a strong way. Even the Shloshim, all the potential Mashiachim, as long as they will not become the actual Mashiach, they don't have a clear-cut, strong connection to the Yechidah. Hence, they don't really feel that all in Yemot Mashiach strongly. They may have certain slight nekudas. Slight nekudas, but they don't have feel it. Except the only one who really has that feeling is the Mashiach ben Yosef, who will become the Mashiach ben Yosef, because he's really connected to the Yechidah. So he really feels that future awe. No one, not David HaMelech, Shlomo, no one. That's why the Mashiach ben Yosef is much bigger than Shlomo and Chochmah. And so on. The only other person who may have felt that, but I'm not sure, is Moshe Rabbeinu. Because Moshe Rabbeinu was a Mashiach ben Yosef, who actually became a Mashiach ben Yosef fundamentally. Almost. You see. So obviously Moshe Rabbeinu obviously had certain shaykhs to that awe, in that sense. Now, whether or not he had shaykhs to that awe before he became the girl he saw, I'm not clear. But he's the only other possible one. Because only an actual Mashiach can suffer in that way. Only an actual Mashiach is the one who brings down the future Tzuras HaTorah, the Uris. So therefore only the actual Mashiach can in some way know what that Uris are. And Adam also, because of the fact that he knew what he lost. So therefore we begin to understand what the suffering of the Yisurin of the Mashiach is. That the Yisurin of the Mashiach is fundamentally Yisurin of Chesed Or. He has access to the Uris, he knows the Uris, but he cannot develop them, he cannot live them. He has access to immense Kedusha, which will live in the Yimot Mashiach, but he cannot actualize them. So he suffers intensely. He also sees them in all the Makomas of Klippas, and he understands their manifestation in the Makomas of Klippas. So he suffers also the fact that he sees them in the wrong place. That's the first Yisurin. The second Yisurin is that he envelops, or he actually reflects the Ashchosa of Klal Yisrael. He is a reflection of the Gehenim of Klal Yisrael. Thus he is forced to do Chatonim and so on, in all its different ways and so on, and yet, with Allah, even though he doesn't want to. Why doesn't he want to? Because he has the Ruchnis at the same time. He is a man who is split. He is the essence of a multiple personality. He is a man who on one side is a Tzaddik Gamor, and the other side is Ashchosa, and so on. And both of these kochas, in both extremes, live in the same person. He is thus in a constant state of mental agony. Because of that, you see. And his avodah is not only to serve with his Yisurin, but to survive, and not to become a real Rasha through the Bechira that he's allowed. That's his avodah. His Yisurin is twofold: the Chesed Or and the Ashchotza of the Kfir of the Yetzirah, which governs him and dominates him because of the Klippa. His avodah is also twofold. His avodah is to be served with the Yisurin, number one, and number two, to survive as an Erech Yid to the best way that he can. You see, using the Bechira that he has, and not allowing the tremendous Hashchata to take over him and completely destroy him. You see, the ability to jockey around with all these different things is obviously a very, very difficult thing, and is an immense Yisurin in that way. And it's all coupled by the fact that all the stuff is going on, and he still doesn't know that he's the Mashiach. So he doesn't even have a nechama about what's going on. He doesn't even have a nechama. He only gets the nechama when he finds out he's in the Mashiach. And then it is obviously a very big nechama, you see. But until then, for how many years he has to go through, and there's obviously a considerable number of years, he doesn't have any nechama in that sense. I want to make one thing clear, that even though there's a Mashiach ben Yosef in every generation, it is only the actual Mashiach ben Yosef himself who actually goes through this Yisurin and has this entire experience, because he's the one who is most directly connected to the Yechidah, and because of that, he is the one who most feels the Kedusha of the Yechidah and the Or, and he is the one who most feels the Klippa on the Yechidah. All the other Mashiach ben Yosef feel it very slightly, but they don't feel it to that extent. Yeshaya is describing the actual Mashiach ben Yosef who will actually become the Mashiach ben Yosef. He is the one that has to go into this entire mess. None of the other Mashiach ben Yosef really have to have that situation. Now the final question is, what is the nature of this Hashchasa? In other words, he has to be Sovel, the Gehenim of Klal Yisrael. But the truth of the matter is, does that mean he's over all Tayag mitzvahs? Is that what it means? No, the answer is he is not.
First of all, let me say that there is no Sform that actually discuss the two Hashchasa of the Mashiachim. There is no Sform in that kind of sense. Whatever I see, whatever I understand is, we can understand just by the nature of certain things. But the Sform only allude to it, but no one says what it is. Either because they don't know, or they do know and they don't want to reveal it. It's not clear. However, fundamentally, what I've been able to piece together is basically a basic idea that the Gehenna of the Mashiach ben Yosef is not that he's over all Taryag mitzvahs, because Klal Yisrael is over Taryag mitzvahs. No, it's not so. I will only go into this slightly now and much deeper later on. You remember when we said that by Odom Rishon Kodem Lachet, the main Yetzer Hara, the seat of the Yetzer Hara lay in the Taiva of Achila, right? That's where the Yetzer Hara was, and that's where they only had one mitzvah of Achila. Well, basically, it's on. After the Chet of Odom Rishon, that Yetzer Hara shifted from Achila to Arias, to Zima, or to the sexual area. You see, that was the main seat. Now, the main seat of the Satan constitutes really what the foundation of the Satan is. In other words, that even though Klal Yisrael does many chatoyim, you see, where the Yetzer fundamentally gets its biggest koyach is in the area of the sexual area of Zima, of Gilo Arias. You see. However, there's something else, which is obviously also, and this is the thing, that when the Yetzer shifted from Taivas Achila to Taivas Zima, Arias, what fundamentally happened means that the essence of the Yetzer Hara, or the fundamental Chet, which symbolized the Yetzer Hara, shifted. In other vision before the Chet, the fundamental thing which symbolized the Satan was its Achila. After the Chet of the Odom Rishon, the main thing which symbolized the Chet was the Zima, and that's by the Indian of the Ola. Odom Rishon Gun Ola, because it was Mechata, the crown, the Atorah on the Eva, which is a simon that it was Machshich, the Gili Chut in the world. In other words, the Klippo, the Zoyamah, entered the world through Zima, and it rested at Zima. That means that when Klal Yisrael does many Chatoim, no matter what Chatoim they do, whatever Taryag mitzvahs or Esel to say, fundamentally, the power that accrues to the Satan, in that sense, becomes bigger and bigger. However, the one power that he has that becomes very powerful is in the area of Zima. You see, that's where the Klippa is, fundamentally. Even when a person eats Machalas Asuras, it affects the Klippa of Zima. Now, it doesn't affect the Klippa of Zima on that person. Only the Klippa of Machalas Asuras is affected. But when you ask, what is the central Chet, which symbolizes the Yetzer Hara? What is the cornerstone of the Yetzer Hara? What is the one area in which all the kirkus of the Yetzer Hara are invested? It's the Zima. Therefore, what I believe, what seems to be, is what happens on the Yeshua and Mashiach is the following: that the main Fiyas HaYetzer, which is fundamentally the Gehenna of Klal Yisrael, is really symbolized or it's manifest in the entire area of Zima. That's really where it is. So therefore, the Inyan of the Mashiach ben Yosef is in the Inyan of a Nesoyan of Zima. And that's what you see by Yosef HaTzadik. Where was Yosef HaTzadik tested? He was tested in the area of Zima, you see. And even by David, he was tested in the area of Zima. And Yehud and Tamar, it was always the Inyan of Zima. Why? Because after the Chet of Odom Rishon, it was always Zima, which fundamentally would symbolize the essence of the Korach of the Klippa, of the Satan. We will get into that much deeper, why it was Zima. Later on I will discuss that, why it was Zima, you see. But notwithstanding that fact, it is Zima which is now the fundamental area which is the investiture of the Satan. Therefore, the Mashiach is, when we say that he is in a state of Hashchasa, when we say that he's forced to do Chatoim, we are referring to Chatoim obviously in the sexual area, in the area of Arias. That's where he is smitten. That's where he's profaned, and that's where he's diseased. It's in that area, because that's the area which symbolizes the koyach of the klippa, in that sense, and that's the area which is a reflection of the entire Gehenna of Klal Yisrael, which really comes from all Taryag mitzvahs.
But when you take all the Tayyik mitzvahs and you fuse it into one area of a klipa, it goes into the sexual area. So the Mashiach ben Yosef feels an incredible sexual drive which is fundamentally uncontrollable. That's basically what it is. That's what it appears to me to be what the essence is. How it runs out. You see? Which means that he's not a person that has to run into a tray for a restaurant, all these things. But he's a person who is constantly involved in a riot. You see? He's constantly involved in his surabia. You see? To what extent is not clear. That's unknown. But obviously this is the area which symbolizes the Gehenna of Parasol. And that's the area which has to be civil. So, with this understanding, we can begin to piece together the mental picture, the experience of what this person feels like. He's a person who's plagued with unbelievable sexual drive. He's a person who's plagued with incredible Kedushim Dreikus. At the same time, he's a person who's plagued with incredible Chokhmah and Oris of Emes. All of this is going on at the same time. And with all these three going on at the same time, he has no idea that he's the Mashiach, and he has to make sure that he doesn't go totally bananas. That, fundamentally, is the experience of the Mashiach ben Yosef.